All right, so shifting gears a little bit, you learned Arabic over your time in undergrad and masters, and I know you know French as well. That's the first language you learned, is that correct?
You could say it's was my mother tongue because my mom taught it to me when I was young, and yeah, my mom's from Belgium, so
Hmm.
it's her mother tongue for sure. It's her native language, and I sort of learned English and French simultaneously. But my dad was always really encouraging, even though he doesn't really speak French that well. He was always receptive to my mom only speaking to me in French, which could create problems for other families. You know, like I don't understand this language. I don't want my kids speaking a language that I can't really converse well in. And for him, it was the opposite. Like, I want my kids to be better than me, to know more language, to be
Yeah,
more language, to be more culture than me. So my mom and
super
dad, when
cool.
they married, they kind of made this deal that my mom would go back to Belgium every year. And my dad has
Oh,
kept that
wow,
promise, and my mom has kept that as well. So
wow,
we're really attached to Belgium. And I was 6 weeks old when I went to Belgium to get baptized for the first time.
wow.
And I've gone back ever since. And
You
now,
go every year?
French, yeah, just about. But French is not as strong as English. I really feel like English is the language I master, even though perhaps I struggle sometimes with idioms or with prepositions and writing. Sometimes I wonder, is that an effect of French, of knowing a couple languages, because
Hmm.
sometimes I confuse them a bit. But I think yeah, I'm not sure why that is yet. I would like to say it is that and not a reflection of just not being able to properly articulate.
But yeah, I mean, I know Spanish not as well as French or Arabic, but I can get around in Spanish and a little bit of Portuguese as well. And I've kind of experienced the same thing. Like when I've been traveling for a while and I've been using a different language, like the English, it gets more kind of muddied. You know, it's like the flow of thought is a little, and it's almost like I'm thinking on a sublingual level. So this is kind of what I want to kind of like dig into for you. You know, you've grew up speaking multiple languages. For me, it was a little different. I grew up speaking English, and then in my teens, I learned some Spanish, and 20s kind of started tacking on a little bit more. But um, like when you're thinking, is it usually like in a language, or is it kind of sublingual, which you can then like translate out into Arabic or English? I don't know. It's always hard to like actually articulate how these processes work, but um, I don't know what is that
Yeah,
experience like?
I love the categorization of sublingual because I think there are certain categories where, for some reason, I've developed the habit of cursing in Arabic. I don't know why that happens, but I think it's just more evocative and powerful. It's really
Hmm.
cursing in Arabic is really. I mean, English cursing is sexual too. I think a lot of languages cursing is somehow sexual, but in Arabic, it's really direct. But and then French perhaps is the language of endearment. I used to do this thing, this like linguistic sort of trick that I played with my mom, where if I wanted something, if I asked in English, she would say no. If I asked again in English, she would say no. Mom, can I sleep over Sam's? Mom, can I sleep over Sam's? No, no, no. Maman, je peux dormir chez Sam? And then she would say, oh, okay, chérie. Like, yes, my sweetheart. Like, fine. Like, if I speak to her in French, for example, it somehow was more endearing because it touched her maybe in a more, I don't know, personal way. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, there's some people that also, I find the language you start off speaking with someone is the language you will carry out with them. And it's really hard to break that
Interesting.
habit sometimes. So, for example, I can never speak to my grandparents in English, even though, well, they're not that great in English anyway. My step grandfather is good, really, really good, very literary in English, but just speaking to him in English would be really bizarre. And
Hmm.
yeah, but I think also I carry various personalities in various languages. That's
Yeah,
something
that
I've
was
heard.
going to be my
I think
question.
Charlemagne, right, the ruler, medieval ruler, would say, I think you are as many languages You are as many men as many languages that you speak, whatever that means.
Interesting. That's cool.
Personalities, perhaps.
I've felt that myself too a little bit, and I've heard other people kind of say that. I've also heard and kind of experienced too, like a voice change up. Like it's like not only does my personality, like what I say, but it's like the way I say it, like the actual like quality of my voice. Like it's
Definitely,
I think it's like it's a little higher pitch when I speak in Spanish. I don't know how it works that way, but it's kind of funny. Have you had many relationships where you like whoever you're talking with, you guys like switch between languages, jump from French to Arabic, and kind of piece together a conversation?
Yeah. So my partner Rebecca, she's Lebanese, but also American, and she also grew up. So she was born in the U.S. in Maryland actually, and then moved back to Lebanon because her parents wanted to raise the kids in Lebanon. And she's from the mountains in the north. Actually, it's in the mountains, but near the sea. I think it's one of the most unique geographic locations. Nice. And around there, it's like a beacon of Maronitism, which is one of the main religions in Lebanon that's tied to the Catholic Church. And historically, this has changed. It's more complicated, but a lot of Maronites have a strong relation with France and with French language too. So a lot of them can get by in French or are Francophone or Anglophone. She's Anglophone, so she's really bilingual.
What is it?
I guess that means that it's her secondary education, her education in general was conducted in English. And so it's bifurcated usually in Lebanon between French and English. So you'll find 40% of the country is French educated and 60% is English educated. Of those who are lucky enough to go to school, which is a large proportion. But anyways, she was English educated, but still had 10 years of French classes, which is her French when we started dating came back like this, and she has a really nice accent. So that's cool. I put it, since I'm sort of studying Arabic linguistics and I'm really into the literature and stuff, she helps me out so much and has helped me with the Lebanese dialect. And we often switch between languages, and then we started adding French as well. And she's been with me to Belgium, and my grandmother is really strict about speaking French with her because all the other, I suppose, in-laws kind of failed. Like my dad and my uncle's wife, just not good at French really, but they see a little hope in Rebecca.
Nice.
So long story short,
cool.
We find ourselves, it's also a very Lebanese thing. It's so jarring. You go there and you'll hear someone. So the cliche Lebanese expression, and it's a cliche because it's true, is "Hi, kifak, ça va?" which means it's French, English, and Arabic all in one expression, and it's what they say all the time. It's like, "Hi, how are you? How are you?" Sort of.
That's pretty cool. Can you just for my understanding, can you break it down like word by word and just like what? How does that work?
So, hi is the obvious, right? Hello, and then the kifak is for a guy. Kifak, kif-ik is for a girl. I'm not sure what that's called linguistically, but it's a gendered language like French or a lot of the Romance languages. So you'd either say hi kifak or hi kif-ik, and then ça va. It's like in French, comment ça va? When if you want to say in French, like, how you doing? Like, ça va? So they'll say that whole phrase upon meeting someone, a friend, for example. It's quite informal.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. I have limited experience since most of the places I've traveled are just speak one language, but when in certain places I've kind of been a part of those conversations where it's switching, especially like in the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. There's like a lot of Jamaican influence. So there's like the patois, which kind of brings in a little bit of French, a little bit of Spanish, and some African languages, and then there's that infused with Spanish, infused with English, and I don't know. It's just I always think it's
impressive.
Cool.
It's really impressive when you realize the extent to which the world outside of the U.S. sort of manages multiple languages.
I know.
Navigates them just seamlessly. It's really, really impressive.
Yeah. Um, one more question is, and this is me kind of just out of my curiosity, but so all the languages that I've studied, Spanish, a little bit of Portuguese, and I'm currently on Unit 2 of French Duolingo, so coming
Let's
forward on that
go.
one. But um, they're all Romance languages, and Arabic is not. So I guess, and for you, you grew up speaking English and French, so you didn't like have to like learn. You didn't have to like sit down and like figure out a second Romance language, but you did for Arabic. But just what's your experience learning Arabic as a non-romantic language coming from a romantic language background?
It's definitely challenging. It's a Semitic language, so it's like Hebrew as well, and Aramaic, which isn't really spoken. If I'm if that's I'm pretty sure isn't really spoken, obviously. So it's a small language family. There are a couple other languages, and well, one, there's the speaking that's different because there are a couple of sounds that are just we don't find in Romance
Mm-hmm.
languages. But then there's also the script, which is difficult and totally different as well. But there's this sort of a lot of assumptions that learning like Arabic or non-European languages in general must be so much more challenging. Perhaps it is more definitely with Chinese, or when people
Mm-hmm.
make these categories of the hardest languages in the world, and often Arabic is up there. I sort of want to dispute that and say Arabic or language learning really isn't hard. It's just about discipline, or that a child, for example, learns a language way faster than an adult. I wonder what the science is behind that, because I've read both mixed reviews, and I don't know if there is a clear verdict on that. It'd be interesting to talk to a linguist, but I think it's really just about my personal belief is it's about the amount of hours you put into the language and the
Mm-hmm.
practice that you put into it. And yeah, I guess one of the reasons that helped me fall in love with Arabic was, well, we did start off with the grammar and with tough words and with a lot of drills. We also started off with songs and movies and fun cultural events that were integrated in the classroom by this professor I mentioned, Rebecca Jubin. And so, really early on, I started to realize how romantic Arabic is. Like, there's this Lebanese singer named Fairuz who's just very well known for singing about an older epic of Lebanon, where in the mountains and the beauty and your boyfriend and girlfriend Habibi, and oh, you melt my heart, and all these really romantic lyrics. So that really helped me and also living in the country where they speak the language, I think is like the most important thing. I'm not an autodidact. I cannot learn on my own. I need to be like immersed with teachers teaching me. I don't think I'm
Mm-hmm.
talented at languages. I think the only reason I made it this far in Arabic, farther than a lot of people I studied with, is just because of perseverance. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you had put the same amount of hours as I did in Arabic, you would probably be more fluent than I am. It's been really
I,
challenging.
I'm honestly kind of the same. My journey with Spanish was I studied for 4 years in school, or 3 years for my middle school, and I was the worst. Like I did pretty well with my grades, but Spanish was my worst class. I didn't like it. I didn't get it. And then my mom, she kind of pulled the hero move and connected with someone in Guatemala, and I did like a 2 week abroad program, same kind of thing. And I was
I
just like,
remember that.
yeah,
Was
yeah.
that before or after the mountain school?
That was before I did it. The first time was before my freshman year of high school, and then I went. Since it went well, I basically went from like in 2 weeks. I went from the worst in my class to like maybe not the best, but like I could probably speak the best, and then like I was always bad at like the accents, like like the technical grammar stuff. But
Right.
in terms of speaking, like I could get around, and so that was after 2 weeks, and then I went back the next 2 years for like 3 weeks or a month each, and then that was when I like could actually do Spanish, and part of so I was kind of learning Spanish. It started in middle school, but really was those 3 trips to Guatemala, which were before freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So right before the mountain school, I was probably coming off of a Guatemala trip. But in that like over the course of that time, like there was a lot going on for me. I mean, I was in high school. I was kind of learning about life for myself. And then there was the travel aspect, being in Guatemala, which is a very different way of life than the United States, and sort of experiencing that. And I didn't have my parents with me for those trips. So there was also kind of like that being out on my own for extended periods of time for the first time. So there was a lot, but I really think that learning Spanish is really what changed my mind the most in those years. Like those 3-4 years were really important developmentally for me. But I think that learning Spanish was probably the most important part. And it was like, it kind of forced me to see, and again, this is coming from my background of only speaking one language prior. So you might've been a little different since you already had 2 languages. But it just forced me to see that people think differently, like there's just like little, like sometimes in Spanish, you'll say the word like I have hunger instead of I am hungry, which is just a subtle difference, but like it changes the way you think about hunger, and it's just, and all these subtle differences, they add up and there's patterns of them. And it's just like kind of changes the way people live their life, starting with the language. And studying Spanish kind of forced me to see that and forced me to feel it, like I would go and speak Spanish for a month and I would think differently and sort of change the way I lived a little bit. But my question for you is, in learning Arabic, so it's a little different contextually for you since you already had a second language, but this is your first non-romantic language and the first time that you really like sat down and learned a language through your own effort rather than just being like taught through experience as a kid. But did you have a similar experience, like thinking differently, kind of seeing the world differently, like becoming a different person in some ways?
Yes. And also, but I liked what you're saying, how sort of language and studying languages makes you realize just the diversity of this world, and just how overwhelming and expansive the world is and diverse, really. But I think also it made me realize like also how many points we have in common. Perhaps this is just a critique of globalization and capitalism and, U.S. hegemony, etc. But something beyond that as well, which is just that like I had a lot in common, the same sort of ambitions and desires that I myself had, and that, or maybe my friends had, growing up, to get a car, a nice car, and get a house and get married, and you find that in all over the world. And so having conversations, and I think the reason why people were more open to me is because I was putting in the effort. There's been a lot of critique on like the English spreading around the world, or the Disneyification of the world, as one author put it in in comparative literature. But at the same time, there's the negative side of that is that like everyone sort of expects that when you expect to speak to you in English, and therefore when you travel, people will apologize for not being able to properly speak English, versus you should have to apologize for not properly speaking the language that you're going to travel, where you're going to travel to. So when you go to Guatemala and try and make an effort to speak Spanish and stuff, I think it's appreciated, and therefore you can pick up on nuances. I think also like learning proverbs is really cool, because there's some universalism in them. Like if you try and find the origins of proverbs, sometimes you'll find the origins, like the question of authenticity and stuff, it's impossible. They come from like the Bible or from like pre-biblical times, from ancient times, some of like the oldest sort of proverbial sayings on jealousy and love and ambition, etc., etc. But then sometimes you'll find some that speak to the nuances of the culture, like in Arabic, like if you say in Syria, especially, "Hamatik b'thabbik," it's like your mother-in-law loves you. That's what that phrase means, and it's a proverb that you use when, let's say, you go to someone's house and they're eating, and you come uninvited or invited, and there's food out, and they say, "Hamatik b'thabbik," your mother-in-law loves you, which means come share this meal with us. You have to eat with us because your mother-in-law loves you, and it shows sort of the importance of food and And I think food is universally important, as I said before, but especially, Lebanese Syrian food is really important. The cuisine is really, really important. It's really, really rich as well. So I hope I answered your question, that studying the language made me realize the differences, but also the sort of the commonality. And also on a political note, and the last thing I'll say, because Arabic is ultimately, like everything, so politicized, that when the Arab Springs happened in 2011, the sort of failed uprisings, if you will, like a lot of people writing from New York were like, oh my God, Arabs want democracy. What is this? This is unreal. It was like an awakening, not so much for the Arab region, but for like the commentators in the West, who suddenly realized that the same human aspirations were also in the Arab world. And that is something that I've sort of been trying to fight for as well in my own advocacy, if you will, or in my own research and in sort of everything